This is Michelle Gibson, and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio. And Ong is known for having a connection to alternate dimensions. Been researching New Jersey for a while, directed my attention to the Weymouth Furnace, which is in Atlantic County, New Jersey. On the Weymouth Furnace, and I'm seeing references to bog ore, an assumption that this is actually sunk, ruined land, and that there was a civilization there at one time. So I pulled up a map, and I could see a linear alignment between these three barrens. How do we reconcile our divine, spiritual, loving natures, or natures as divine love and bliss, the highest level of consciousness, with the messiness of the world that we're living in? And so our star tetrahedron light body is the same as the Earth's, as the same as the center of the universe. Lighthouses have alignments with the sun and the moon.
You had mentioned the Pine Barrens, and obviously that is a connecting place for Rich and I because we are from New Jersey. So what have you found about the Pine Barrens? What kind of piqued your interest there, and what kind of brought your research to the Pine Barrens?
Asked viewers to both to suggest places for me to look at, but then they just leave comments where they want me to look at places. So somebody that's been researching New Jersey for a while directed my attention to the Weymouth Furnace, which is in Atlantic County, New Jersey. And it's just off of the Great Egg Harbor River, Great Egg Harbor and the river there. And I was just going to look at that one place and then go on to other suggestions, but I got to looking around there and it just sucked me right in. And when it sucked me right in, it laid open this whole region in terms of importance and anomalies. And so I'm looking around for information on the Weymouth Furnace, and I'm seeing references to bog ore, and that this bog ore would be harvested from the swamp, and they would pull along canals in these barges to take this ore to this furnace so they could make pots and pans and whatnot. And that these furnaces required an incredible amount of heat. So they were always built where there was wood so they could generate this heat. And the key words to me were bog ore and canal, because the research that I'd done of New Jersey in the past has involved canals, like the Morris Canal in particular, which I found off of Jersey City when I was tracking an alignment through New York City. And so that had come to my attention because it was a very sophisticated canal system. So I see this reference to canals in southern New Jersey and bog ore, and go to an NPS website or whatever, and they tell you with a straight face that there's naturally occurring iron ore in these bogs that just regenerate. And I'm working from an assumption that this is actually sunk, ruined land, and that there was a civilization there at one time. And so, that's the story that they tell, is that this is naturally occurring iron ore that they were harvesting in these canals in the 18th, 19th century. Who built the canals? They don't that, but if you do a search of the area, you still see canals around southern New Jersey. And so I got to looking at that, and it was in the Pine Barrens. And then I read where there's two other existing Pine Barrens besides New Long Island, and one in Cape Cod area in Massachusetts. And so that really got my attention. So I pulled up a map and I could see a linear alignment between these three barrens. And then I just started looking at the area from Cape Cod, because the headquarters of the Pine Barrens was in Plymouth. And of course, Plymouth is where the Pilgrims landed, right? That really got my attention. And then I just did a whole deep dive into the islands down through that region, through what they call the New Jersey, New York Bight. And, I'm really thinking that the sinking of Atlantis was not that long ago, and that whole area just kind of dropped off. And there was an extreme amount of interest in that region from the colonizers. And then if you look at the shoreline of New Jersey, southern Jersey, on up to around the entrance to the Hudson River, and then you start going northeast along Long Island, the coast is just marshy and submerged. And, the estuary is defined as, freshwater and saltwater meet and brackish and shallow. And there was just a lot of information that came up in the research that I did for that. I called it Recovering Lost History from the Pine Barrens estuaries and elite enclaves of the Atlantic coast there. And the the wealthy elite have staked claim on that land. It's luxury prime real estate. But again, when you look at it, it's not it's not really much to speak of. It's like half sunk and all this other stuff. Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Block Island, on down through there. And then when you get to Long Island, you have Montauk Point and the whole Montauk experiment thing. And then I found Plum Island, which is a biological research center and bioweapons as well. And then Brookhaven Labs. And this is in a triangular relationship on the eastern end of Long Island. And Brookhaven Labs has a particle accelerator that's like a mirror of CERN. And I knew there was something there, but I didn't really know until I did the research for that. And then you get on down into New Jersey Pine Barrens, and you've got, abandoned railroad tracks and, locomotives all over the place. The history that they tell us is really sketchy. They were building these railroads to get to Atlantic City and all of these other places. And why were they building the railroads through this marshy land? And then you get into the really weird stuff that happens there, and a place called Ong, which isn't too far from Philadelphia. And so I think there's a connection to that whole region with what's happened here. And I'll stop there and just see what thoughts you have about what I just said.
Michelle, did you say Shamong?
Ong. Ong's, yeah.
Okay. Because there's a Shamong in that near Cherry Hill area too. I wasn't sure if that was the same place you were referencing, but going back to Plum Island, I've heard of that. That's where they suspect that maybe Lyme's disease came from, correct?
It sure looks like it. I mean, it's only 18 miles from Lyme, Connecticut.
Yeah. I hadn't heard of the lab place that you had mentioned, so I don't know, but that's interesting. There's also a CERN type place in Colorado too, that I've heard about as well. But the Montauk project stuff, that's fascinating. And I'm teaching high school again, so I had some kids that are into Stranger Things, and so when I told them that was based on true events, they they were doubtful, to say the least. And I was like, because they all have Chromebooks, I said, go ahead, look it up, fact check me. And there was two kids that were blown away that that the stuff that happens in Stranger Things is based off of true events. So it's fascinating. I watched your video about the Pine Barrens. I was really excited because Jimmy and I are relatively close to the growing up in the Pine Barrens. We grew up on the ocean along the coast, and we see all of those fancy beach houses that are there. Like you said, it's probably not the safest place to put multi-million-dollar homes, but yet they continually do those sorts of things. So I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward when we get off of here to check out your new video. I mean, it's so interesting that with all that's gone on in the last 3 years or whatever it's been, the stolen history or the lost history is the stuff that keeps me coming back and keeps me interested and fascinated. And as you were saying, as we start to research these things, the internet is kind of breaking apart the narrative, because when you look at some of these architectures and the structures, whether it's the World's Fair or just some of these buildings, the timeline for construction just doesn't, you can't wrap your head around like some of these massive structures. And it's like, oh, it was a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years, and then it stood for 10, 20, 30 years, and then they tore it down. It's crazy.
And that story is repeated over and over again. Big, beautiful, monumental architecture. And a really good example is Penn Station in New York City. Massive.
Yep.
Supposedly only stood for 60 years before they tore it down. And it's just old world style architecture, and that was early in my research coming across things like that. But when you really get down to it, it's so hard to know exactly what's taken place. I feel like I'm in the ballpark with a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. As I've really I've been immersed in this stuff for 4.5 years. And I started with a particular paradigm, which I'd call the Moorish paradigm, but it's based on sacred geometry and the whole idea that this was a beautiful worldwide unified civilization, because everything that I'm seeing is integrated. Was beautifully integrated and I think connected to a free energy generating grid that was mutually beneficial and life enhancing. And a lot of this has been destroyed, but they still have a lot of it left. And I gave some examples in the video that you got to see about Coney Island and how Coney Island used to look and how Atlantic City used to look, with big, beautiful domed architecture and minarets and, everything all lit up at night and big towers and all of that just got destroyed. And there were 3 big amusement parks like that on Coney Island. And, I think that whole area must have just been this massive powerhouse. And that's why the elites, went there and systematically took apart the whole energy grid system, what's left of it. And I think that includes lighthouses. And the lighthouses were some kind of distribution, maybe light distribution or something, because they went after lighthouses. There's some still standing on the Hudson River, for example, but there used to be a lot more. And there were what were called electric parks or amusement parks up and down the Hudson River. They're gone. And I think all of those are playing a function on this original grid. And I think the controllers have just reverse engineered everything to harvest energy and keep us controlled. So we've talked in the past about the beautiful big high schools in Denver.
Yeah.
Old architecture. So what do? They stick kids in this original architecture, and banks are the same way, and theaters and museums, and their museums are showing the history they want us to learn. They all are.
Yeah.
This is the way that it was.
Yeah.
This is what we want you to think. Caveman to the way we are now. And that's so far from the reality when you really start looking into it. Just looking around where you live. But it's still not clear exactly what's taken place here. Just that it ain't good for us or life or the earth.
Right. And it's not what we're told.
It's definitely not what we're told.
Yeah.
I want to get back to the canals and just kind of maybe what your thought is on, after your research, maybe who brought those canals there, where they came from, and then maybe you were mentioning what was in the ground. Was it called ore?
Iron.
They call it bog ore.
Bog
There
ore.
are these naturally occurring iron ore beds in the swamps.
So yeah, maybe kind of what your thoughts are on that, and maybe you mentioned sacred geometry, and it's funny because these interviews we talk to someone and then we talk to someone else and they connect the dots, and the sacred geometry has been coming up more and more in these conversations. Maybe kind of go into your journey with that, but let's address the canals first.
Okay, so this original worldwide civilization was a canal building civilization. Canals were like roads for them. As a matter of fact, I think some of our roads were canals originally. They probably had roads too, but think about Venice all over the earth. Venice, Italy is just one example, but I found canals up in Central Asia, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. I found canals. There's a canal in Tashkent, Uzbekistan called Angkor, Ankhor, as Egyptian sounding as it comes, Angkor Canal. And so this civilization that I became aware of, that goes back to ancient Mu or Lemuria, but it's also what we would know as Atlantis. And that I think there was a continuous civilization from ancient times to modern, and then something happened that just flipped everything on its head. And that's actually where I think the Philadelphia experiment comes in somehow. And the video on the Pine Barrens is actually the most evidence I've ever found in one place that would explain a whole burst of energy coming down through that area, causing the Pine Barrens and whatnot. And Philadelphia is right there. It's like really close to Ong in the Pine Barrens. It's right next to the Pine Barrens. And Ong is known for having a connection to alternate dimensions. And again, that's described as like a conspiracy theory, and it was just kind of this game that was going on. But I think it exists because for a reason. Like there's something to it, like a persisting thing, like the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk's a conspiracy theory. Well, there's a lot of people out there that write about it or, say they were part of it, about these government experiments and trauma-based mind control and time travel and things like that. And so, I do think that there's some kind of connection going on there, and that the Pine Barrens were caused by an event. I think a discrete event caused them. And my postulation would be relatively recently. And they just messed with our timeline somehow, because they wanted to bring in this new world that they had control of, so they could get control of us and all the resources and the money. And here we are, what the heck, what's going on here, barely give us enough to think we're having a good life. As they take it through taxes and other ways. And I think they had to do it this way because of our free will, and they couldn't just come in and do it. So they had to kind of go around the back door and basically steal it from us and lie to us to get our consent, because we have to consent to what happens, but we don't know what we're consenting to. Is how I see it.
Well, Michelle, it's interesting you talk about the bogs and something coming through the Pine Barrens. The Pine Barrens is well known for their cranberry bogs too. And so I wonder if that could be something. There's all these areas you drive through the Pine Barrens and you see these, areas where they would, I don't know how, if it's still as prominent as it once was, but I mean, they flood those areas and then they harvest their cranberries and that sort of stuff. So I wonder if there's a connection between the cranberry bogs and the bog ore and all that stuff in the Pine Barrens.
Yeah, my thought is that whole region sank at some point, and that there was civilization on it through that area. And the Pine Barrens are filled with abandoned towns. Like I said, railroad tracks, abandoned buildings. I've had some interesting comments from people from the area on that particular video on YouTube, and they recall these strange stories, things happening there. I looked up, is it called Apple Pie Hill or something like that? You know what I'm talking about?
That one? No.
I didn't look into it, but it caught my eye because anything that's like a hill, I kind of look for a pyramid or some kind of built structure, because that's another way they hide it. They had a lot of things in language. But getting back to the layers of deception, it's like they did something with time, and linear time was an artificial introduction. The time was measured in cycles at one point, but with linear time, they can, they have us going on this closed loop, with ritual dates throughout the year on that hamster wheel. We don't see our connection to other things and other people and other times. So that is another effect of the linear time system that we're on. But what really gets confusing is, I know I've seen pictures on the internet of places like Pittsburgh in the night. It's, said it was taken in the early 1900s, and it looks like it's covered in mud. So the 1800s, I kind of get it. That was a time that they were digging things out from a mud flood that I think took place. Some kind of cataclysm happened. Lots of ideas as to the cause. I've mentioned the Philadelphia experiment, but I'm comfortable with the idea that that potentially went back in time and created a rip in the fabric of space-time, and then the guys came back, and that's what happened with it. And that where I think it went, which would have been around 1740, 1741 in Ireland, caused a great frost during that time, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths in Ireland. And within 3 years, Mayor Michelle Rothschild was born. And Adam Weishaupt came in after that, and Rockefellers, and there was a whole slew of beings that came in during that time that I think are very much part of this. So that's kind of where I've landed with that. But getting back to what I was talking about with the photo of Pittsburgh in the early 1900s, what's going on with streets covered in, places covered in mud and still being dug out in the early 1900s. I'm just throwing that out there because there's some things I'm still not clear on exactly what's taken place here. But I've done a lot of timeline research, and I think I've been able to put a lot of the puzzle pieces together. It's just really hard. So kind of getting back to what you were saying, Jimmy, I believe that ancient civilization was Moorish, and that the Moors were all over the earth, including here. But the problem is the controllers took everything associated with the Moors and pulled out everything and used that to further divide humanity. So they used skin color to divide humanity. They used symbols and religion. So the Star of David, star tetrahedron, which is the sacred geometric figure that is our light body, got associated with Judaism, modern Judaism, and Christianity with the cross, and the pyramid with the all-seeing eye got associated with Big Brother. But originally it was about our connection with our higher selves, through our pineal gland going up to our all-seeing eye, which is the creator, who we're directly connected to. But they don't want us to know that either. They don't want us to know anything about the true nature of our reality in our lives. So they've done everything they can to slice and dice and keep us from knowing that. And we're sitting here going, arguing, and the earth's flat, the earth's round, no, you're crazy. And those are all just distractions to keep us not focused on what's really going on. Look over here, not here. So when you're growing up in a place like the Pine Barrens nearby, did you notice anything out of the ordinary when you were growing up?
No, I think
I'll say Manasquan sticks out to me. If you think about it, like as far as, and even downtown Point Beach, like the Point Beach High School, just maybe didn't stick out growing up. But if you ask me now if there's anything, those would be 2 points. What about you, Rich?
Well, I was gonna suggest, Michelle, at some point you put on your radar Asbury Park. Because there's it's definitely it's been a place. They have a convention hall, they call it, and it's a big convention building that extends out onto a pier that goes out into the ocean. But now looking at it, from my eyes, it definitely has a lot of those kind of old world architecture and maybe some Antiquitech type stuff on it. And someone had just pointed out a new follow for us that they kind of do like the old world sort of investigations and stuff. And they just did a video about Asbury Park. And then, the lighthouses are always pretty prominent. There's They call it Old Barney. It's on Barnegat Light, which is on Long Beach Island,
Mhm.
which is a barrier island that's it's due east of the Pine Barrens. Pretty much, it's 18 miles in length. Um, and then in Atlantic Highlands, there's the Twin Lights, which is
Mhm.
the Twin Lights sits in Atlantic Highlands, and Atlantic Highlands is the highest coastal point on the East Coast.
Mhm. And it sits above Sandy Hook Point, and there's Fort Hancock at the end of Sandy Hook, and
Yes.
the
Let's
lighthouse there
go.
is seriously. And they said that the Twin Lights was built during the Civil War, as part of the narrative. And it's
Hmm.
just this beautiful, heavy masonry, and these lighthouses have alignments with the sun and the moon, and they want us to believe all this random and, give this story about how they were built and who built it. And, places like lighthouses and Capitol buildings, and they they have these solar and lunar alignments. And um, the Manhattan street grid is oriented to the solstice, the winter solstice, and
Interesting.
not just Manhattan, but other cities as well. So everything seems to be oriented to the cardinal directions, and placed perfectly for these, annual events with the sun and the moon, probably other things as well. And that's modern architecture. So that's why I say this civilization was ancient to modern, and wasn't anything like what we've been told, because we were at a higher level of consciousness that was love based and in unity. And I think these opportunistic beings saw an opportunity to come in and crash the party, and did. And that's what we're living through right now. I do see an end to it. I don't think they're going to get away with it. And I think we're seeing a lot of things play out right now before the dawn comes. But um, humanity's been in very grave danger for a long time, and people don't realize it because of the success of the mind control programming and everything else. They don't know that they're being that there's this war going on against humanity, and that they've been a victim of these psyops that have been ongoing for quite some time, so that people wouldn't question the gaslighting,
Yeah.
and the crazy things that we're told today. That's like, people, older, um, remember a different time, but the kids growing up don't necessarily know.
No, and unfortunately, I don't think a lot of at least the kids that I'm seeing and experiencing right now, um, they're so wrapped into their phones. It's pretty scary. It's sad that
Yeah.
they will spend hours just with their face in their phone. So they're just oblivious to what's going on around them. So you have people like us, and we're spreading this ripple, and more people are waking up. But then there's also a generation of people that are just so saturated and consumed by TikTok and Snapchat and these other things, and they're just consuming. They're not even, a lot of them don't even create anything or post anything. They just scroll. So it's like that whole kind of harvesting of energy that they're just not even aware that they're just giving their time and their energy to these devices.
And the same is true of the generation on the other end, the senior generation, because they're reading the newspaper every day and watching the evening news, and scared by the propaganda. Got to get that thing. And I've got a lot of that in my family.
Yeah.
And a lot of older people I know have no idea what's going on and how things really are, and because of the level of propaganda that they get from all directions, except for alternative media and YouTube, and a lot of grassroots people like yourselves and like myself and a lot of other people that took the bull by the horns and felt like there was something important that we needed to get out there. And that is part of the ripple, I think, that you were just talking about. you know, that the technology does allow people to do things that would have been unthinkable, you know, for sure within my lifetime, 20, 30 years ago. You know, I never thought I'd be making videos or writing blogs. Never even crossed my mind. And then all of a sudden I had some really important information to get out and did it. But that was because of feeling like if I had gotten the information and not done anything with it, I couldn't have lived with myself, because I feel like it's that important.
Michelle, you had mentioned the star tetrahedron being our light body, and we've had a guest on, Maureen Saint Germain, and she talked about Merkaba meditation, and that light bulb went on in my head when I started doing my Merkaba meditation and talk about the Earth tetrahedron and the Sun tetrahedron. You were the first person who introduced me to that stuff, and gone back and listening to our original interviews, you know, you said, and you just said tonight, that sacred geometry brought you to this game, and kind of realizing all these energies that are out there and that we can tap into that have been hidden from us, and that we're living on this false timeline. So my question off of all that is, how do you use this information in your daily life to better yourself, maybe live on your own timeline? Do you have any kind of sacred geometry meditations to activate your Merkaba? Because I've been doing it recently, and I notice I can go into public, I feel a little bit more protected, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more shielded. And I'm just curious how much of this has to do with us connecting to our atmosphere and everything around us.
It's extremely important. I first learned about sacred geometry probably around 2007, when I went to a Flower of Life workshop, and I was living in Fairbanks, Alaska at the time. And so I learned about the Flower of Life and the Platonic solids, and started learning about the light body. And it's a star tetrahedron that's around each of us. You know, people with sensitivities can see auras and so forth. I'm not one of them. The only ability that I seem to have that's out of the ordinary is that I'm very intuitive and have enough knowledge to be able to act on it and interpret what I've gotten because of my own life experiences and the stream of information that's come to me throughout my life. So I kind of look at that as my superpower, because it's just stuff I've lived it, but I have all the skills I need to do something with it. But we live in a holographic universe. Have you heard of that idea before?
Yes.
And so our star tetrahedron light body is the same as the Earth's, as the same as the center of the universe. And that's how we're all connected to each other through this shape. And at one point in time, between 2007 and 2012, I learned about how to activate my light body. And I was so prepared back then. I've forgotten more than I remember, but I was so ready to be able to do that and ascend. And, you know, I thought I had it all figured out. And it's just been a heck of a ride. I don't have it figured out anymore. I have this figured out, but in terms of our spiritual journey, you know, how do we move from where we are to where we're going? And I used to think the Merkaba was how we achieve that. And it may still be, there may still be something that happens, but yeah, I kind of thought that there would be some kind of event that we would know that it's time. And I don't think I'm quite there anymore, but for a lot of years, that's kind of what I thought was going to happen, that there was going to be some kind of defining moment and we would know, hey, this is it, pole shift or whatever. Now what I'm hoping to see is the perpetrators of all the evil getting exposed and held accountable and even more waking up to what's actually happened. And that we have a brighter future as a collective when all of the stuff comes about, and maybe as a group or something, we go forward to the next dimension or whatever. But there's definitely a spiritual component to that. And that's why the controllers have worked so hard to keep us in a lower state of consciousness and dumb down so we wouldn't figure all this stuff out. Because we're actually powerful than they are, and they know that. So the only way they can get our consent and agreement is to trick us into thinking they are. But the emperor has no clothes, and they can't keep their story straight, and they lost control of the narrative thanks to YouTubers and other people, the ones that have awakened from the bad dream and the Matrix. A good way of putting it is think of the movie The Matrix as a documentary. and you're kind of getting into the situation we've been living in.
I was going to bring it up, Michelle, and you actually just touched on it. I was curious about your, thought on Earth crust displacement and a pole shift. If there's been multiple resets, and the pyramids aren't, structures like pyramids aren't necessarily connected to the Moorish architecture, if there maybe have been multiple resets, and or if like something like the Philadelphia experiment may have triggered something like a pole shift.
Something like that. I subscribe to the idea that there was one massive reset, and that people are so much closer to God than they realize, which is why we're so special. And if we knew our true abilities, we would be able to do all kinds of things. And I think the ancients knew that. I think they knew who they were, why they were here, what they were capable of. They were able to work with matter in all of its forms and create through alchemy and sound. And I think it was the perfect embodiment of the creator on earth when the civilization was in existence. And I think the sacred texts are real. I think the Bible's been tampered with, but I think it was based on original teachings. And a lot was removed from the Bible. That's known. The Gnostic Gospels and the Council of Nicaea and all that stuff. They took out the good stuff that would tell us that we had these abilities. And because what I see in my research is just this beautiful, highly integrated civilization that if there were multiple resets, there's no way that would have been even possible. It would have been destroyed, and they would have had to rebuild and destroyed and rebuild. And that's not what I'm seeing at all. I'm seeing the evidence for the same thing in China as Oklahoma and other places. So when I said earlier, I think Atlantis sank way more recently than what we've been told. And I think that's what you see on the coasts. I think the marshy bogland is where land was at one time, and civil and buildings. And you see this coastal wetlands and estuaries. You see that all over the earth. And you see that, in the middle of countries. But when you look at these wetland areas, there's evidence that there was something there, like canals and things like that. Look at a place in Wisconsin called the Horicon Marsh. So it's not just in North America, it's all over that you have these, just ruined, desolate lands that are wildlife refuges today. But I think there was something there at one time. So that's the reset I think happened, that there was some kind of massive event that caused a lot of the Earth's landmass to sink. And there's been a lot of cover-ups over the years about that as well, because I know when I was first starting to look for information about all of this, the people that I would watch, like Graham Hancock and a couple of other people, but especially Graham, talking about these sunken places, but they want to say like places like Yonaguni was natural. Well, if you look at the ruins of Yonaguni under the water off the in Japan, it's not natural. You can't even make an argument with a straight face that it's natural, but that's what they tried to do when it first came out. And places off of India, the same idea is they don't want to talk about these places that are sunk. Well, why not? So I think that was part of the cover up also. So that's my feeling. One huge reset, major,
Yeah, big time.
big time. They brought in new languages. They brought in new religions. They rewrote history. They restarted civilization somehow.
Well, yeah,
Everything's buried. It's all this stuff underground.
You talk about the abandoned railroads and stuff, and it's not just in New Jersey. There are abandoned railroads and even the trolleys that have kind of fallen by the wayside. But you tie into that with you're talking about like the repopulation and the orphan trains. That sort of stuff is we grew up on things like Little Orphan Annie, Oliver Twist, where they kind of maybe glorified the orphan aspect of things. But then when you look into it, it's pretty crazy the amount of kids that were just kind of shipped all over the country on trains.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's the infantoriums also, and where there's these neonatal babies as a sideshow attraction at world fairs and places like Coney Island. Pay to go see babies in incubators.
Yeah.
What was that all about? Little Orphan Annie is interesting. If you look up the original poem by James Whitcomb Riley, who's like the poet laureate of Indiana and has his gravesite at the top of this cemetery in Indianapolis called Crown Hill. It's a creepy story. That's a poem. It's about, 4 verses long. The whole Little Orphan Annie thing came out of this poem, and it's a poem about a little girl telling younger kids that they need to be careful or these boogeymen are going to come take them away. That was the poem that it was based on. I recommend looking it up and reading it. It's really creepy. And there was another poem that he wrote called The Raggedy Man. And, that's another one that's just got, like, this guy's famous for that. And that there's a connection between Raggedy Man and Little Orphan Annie and Raggedy Ann. The guy that created Raggedy Ann was a friend of this poet. So why is a raggedy doll, so popular? What's the message there? And I think there definitely was a message.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not being told that we're the ragged stepkids in real life. That's how they look at humans, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting with a lot of the children's literature. You think of the Brothers Grimm and some of the fairy tales we grew up on, and then you hear the origin story, and these weren't really made for kids, or really not in the realm of things that we think they might be. So it's interesting when you kind of have this perspective of hidden history and things being held from us. Kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. That said, you said you're at a point right now where you've been doing research for 4 years pretty hard, and a lot of the puzzle pieces are coming together. You had mentioned the Pine Barrens. Is there anything else in your research that is really just kind of glaring at you right now that we haven't spoke on that you would think it'd be imperative for our audience to hear about?
I've been researching constantly during that time. I've got a huge body of research in my blog, in my videos, but when I do writing from my blog, I can kind of go back and not have to do research over again because I've already looked into it. So part of the latest video is research that I did almost 3 years ago. But I've been able to add a lot more to it. And I guess it's like I can look at a picture like from last year, and I can look at the same picture this year and see things in the picture this year I didn't see last year. That's happened because my vision for this is getting sharper. I think internally there's just this feeling like I've got to get this stuff out, and I don't have enough time in the day to do as much as I want, but I'm chipping away at it. And I don't think I will ever run out of material. I think what's becoming clearer and clearer is how they rig the whole system for their advantage. So when they brought this new system in, the new legal system and all the justification and legitimacy that they built into how they took everything over, the land, the people, the laws. I mean, when you think of Congress or Parliament or whoever passing a law, they call it an act. Well, what's an act in our language? They're acting. I think they're telling us something. It's not really legitimate, but it's their system that they've set up to legitimize all the stuff that they're doing. The law that they've placed themselves above. A very small number of those people, whoever they are, because I think it's only those at the very top that actually benefit. And there's a lot of people that work for them that think they're going to benefit but don't. And the things that have taken place here are so horrible that most people just can't even imagine. And several years ago, I would have been one of them. I'd say, no, that's not possible. I think the first time somebody started talking to me about conspiracy theories, I'm like, oh, no, there's no way. And, the thing is, yes, there is a way. And yes, we've been living that. And they really don't have any power over us. And they have nothing if they don't have our consent. And so I think a big part of the reason that it's taken so long is just what would be called the Great Awakening, and people waking up on their own to it, because you can't tell people, you have to show them what's taken place. And, another example, you talked about the Brothers Grimm. Things I've seen in the alternative media is that human hunting parties have happened in places like the Black Forest. Movies like The Hunger Games are real, kind of like Stranger Things. They show it to us as entertainment, which is, I think, how they get around the they have to tell us what they're doing requirement. And, if we don't question or anything, it's on us. They've told us. The movie Back to the Future has a lot of stuff. You might know this already. You probably do. Has a lot of predictive programming in it. That's like one of the number one examples for predictive programming for 9/11.
Yeah.
Well, even time travel too, right? It's right there. And we are raised on time travel and being, you got to either get into a telephone booth or you got to get into a car. But, you probably know from your sacred geometry studies, you can time travel right here, right now. It's just got to be really good at meditation.
I wish I was better at that. But yes, we have our own vehicle. That's what the Merkaba is. It's our own little ship. And like you said, if you get it activated and get it rotating, it can offer protection and other things as well. So I used to know more than I do right now, but I know enough to have a pretty good idea of the mechanics of that. We're all connected. So how are we all connected?
Energy.
Heart, our energy bodies. Yeah. When I woke up spiritually, which was in 2012, I'm like, oh, we're all one. But I don't think the beings that have done this are part of us. I don't think they are. They're parasites. And so I'm not quite I don't know. Greg Braden was one of my guides along the way, and I guess you've really wakened when you're not fazed by the dark and the light. You all just kind of open your heart and embrace them both. I'm not at a place right now where I can embrace what I'm seeing. Maybe I'll get there someday.
Well, you had mentioned being at a point where you had no more, maybe been more in tune with that spiritual aspect or researching more of those things and kind of not being there right now. And I think that's an important part of the spiritual journey, because you said, right, you get to a point where everything is love and you love everyone, and then at a certain point that's going to wear off, and then it's coming down, and how you reintegrate and how you deal with living in the world we live with, not everyone being on that same vibration and same frequency, and how you can still kind of vibrate at your highest level while living in this world and kind of going in and out of it.
I mean, that really, when you get down to it, that's really what it's all about. How do we reconcile our divine, spiritual, loving natures, or natures as divine love and bliss, the highest level of consciousness, with the messiness of the world that we're living in, which I'm seeing was manipulated. We've been manipulated to do this. I don't think humanity's innately sinful or bad. I think we've been manipulated by these beings so that, because they can't touch us, to carry out their agenda.
You think that the agenda is to harvest energy?
That's part of it.
Yeah.
Because they don't have it. They need
Yeah.
it synthetically. They don't have what we have. But they have the intelligence, if you will, to plan and reverse engineer or whatever, but they need human creativity and human energy to survive.
Yeah, you hear that a lot, that they're not creative. That's why they keep running the same script over and over and over again with some of these things, where the narratives of like the World's Fair stuff, or wars, like using them to take down, like the Dresden stuff is fascinating.
Mhm.
When you see the pictures pre World War II of what that city looked like and what they did to it.
There's a intact Stonehenge in Washington State called the Mary Hill Stonehenge. It's off of the Columbia River. I believe it's on the Washington side, not the Oregon side. It's like bigger. It's more intact than the Stonehenge in England, which I've heard people question when that was built. But this is the one in Washington State has got a nice alignment with the Milky Way, and the solstice, it shines through a particular spot. And it was said to have been built in the early 1900s by a businessman named Sam Hill as a war memorial for local people that were killed during World War I or something like that. And that's the narrative. Those are the stories over and over again. This obelisk was built to honor the Civil War veterans, or people that were killed in this small town. And, multiply by that by thousands and thousands of the explanations for how this incredible stuff came into existence.
Michelle, I'm curious, in your Pine Barrens, in investigating and researching, did you come across any stuff about the Jersey Devil?
I didn't, because I didn't look that far, but somebody left a comment about that.
I was just curious if it all ties together.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does. Because I didn't encounter that information when I was doing that research. The comment had said something about Leeds' 13th child or something like that. And what I did find was that Jeremy Leeds was supposed to have built the first buildings at Atlantic City.
Interesting. Well,
plot thickens.
and it's interesting too. You mentioned Atlantic City before, and some of the old buildings on the boardwalk. We grew up wrestling at Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, which was one of the last older buildings that is still left there. And there's definitely, I mean, obviously it stands out because the rest of the boardwalk is the rest of the boardwalk, but you now going back and thinking of it, it definitely stands out as something I'd kind of like to go back and revisit.
There's a lot of places I want to go back to, knowing what I know now that I didn't know then. I lived in Clovis, New Mexico for 5 years after I got married in eastern New Mexico. And I thought it was, oh my gosh, this is flat and high and boring. And, the sunsets were exciting. Going to see the Gopher Town was exciting, or Prairie Dog Town of the Air Force Base. But I've done some research back through that area since I have learned about all of this stuff. And there's a lot of places I just want to go back and check out. I mean, to me, this is the most exciting thing there is. Like what you were saying earlier, Rich.
Yeah, it's
Coming back to
fascinating.
this, it's like I'm not really interested in in much else.
No, it fascinates me. The architecture, the story, or the narrative. It's just, one after the other. You look at these buildings and the timeline of most of them are built within, 1, 2, maybe 5 years, and they stand for a couple decades, and then it's like, why would you tear this down and that was a big thing. We did kind of like a local store. We had a friend that walked us around Denver, and he was pointing out, oh, this parking structure, this building used to be here, and this building used to be here, and they tore it down, and in the name of restoration. But they tear things down in the name of restoration, and what they put back is a parking structure. It just doesn't make sense.
A lot of times parking structures, buildings made of, plywood and plasterboard,
Hmm.
blow down with the first strong wind.
Yeah.
And where I live in Arizona, between where I live and the main street, I pass by some boulders, cut and shaped stones off to the side of the road. I cross over a canal. It's more like an agricultural kind of thing, but this area is kind of hidden away, but it's covered in canals. And then I'll get up to the main street and I can see the mud flood evidence walking up the sidewalk, things down, and just things you don't really see unless you're walking. You just drive by and, oh, no big deal. And I took a walk not too long ago and I started noticing more, and I've seen other places in the general area that I live in that I would call mud flood evidence, but Sarah, if you know what to look for.
Yeah, definitely. I got one more to put on your radar for future research. Like I said, I'm down here in Northwest South Carolina, and there's a place called the Stump House Tunnel, and it's like just under 2,000 feet long. But it was something that was supposedly built, I want to say around the Civil War time. And they were supposed to use it as a tunnel to get from different places, from Charleston all the way out, maybe to Kansas City or St. Louis. I can't remember. For some reason, they just stopped construction on it, allegedly. And at one point, Clemson University was using it as a place to make blue cheese. So just something to look into. And again, even here in this kind of little town, you're walking, through Main Street and stuff, and there's definitely kind of some what would appear to be, like a mud flood, where there's like the street is like a downhill, but the way how the building's situated, and you got the archways of windows and stuff that are boarded up or bricked up and stuff like that. So just curious. It's, in South Carolina was a big that was a big hotbed for the Civil War. That's where, it started, as they tell us. So Just wondering.
Yeah, and the kinds of things you describe are all over. You know, the uneven streets where they've kind of built everything so it's on a slant. When you think, why would they even build that way?
Yeah.
I mean, the way they build it.
Mhm.
Okay, they built on the side of the hill, but why are the windows like this high at the bottom and like this high at the
Yep.
top,
Yeah.
and the bricked up archways and things like that. So that's here too. And I would say that's probably everywhere, just from what I've seen.
Yeah.
While you're in South Carolina, look up canals there, because lots of old canals in South Carolina. Probably like New Jersey, some are still obviously canals, but a lot of them, I think, have been diverted or dried up or whatever. But plenty of canals in South Carolina, and ruins like sugar mill ruins and things like that.
Yeah.
And sugar mill ruins is kind of a generic term for the kinds of things that you find in the Pine Barrens. You know, these brick structures out in the middle of nowhere. And then Charleston was a star city. If you look at old maps of Charleston, it looks like the star cities of Europe and South America, and, you know, things they don't want us to know.
Yeah, definitely. I'll check it out. Thank you.
Lots to find everywhere.
You had mentioned working with a guide. I know you are in Sedona. We talked about, star tetrahedrons and stuff. So I know you're on the level. And talking about Lemuria and Atlantis, I must ask you, have you ever had a past life regression?
No,
Okay.
not exactly.
I'm just curious because
Not exactly.
as we talk to people who are into this space, I'm just curious to kind of what they have tapped into and all that, and that's all.
I've identified as a light worker for a long time. I had a star ancestry reading where I got the result back that my soul essence is Pleiadian, and I'm cool with that. It explains a lot of things about my life, and that I started coming to Earth many thousands of years ago. So my life has been kind of interesting in that it seems like I've always managed to be in the right place at the right time. And my spiritual practice is not good. I just can't settle down enough. I don't have a focus to become a long distance runner or anything like that. I eat the wrong foods. But the research that I do and the writing that I do and the videos that I make is the easiest thing that I've ever done in my life. So it feels like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do here. And I do believe in reincarnation, and that this is the spiritual journey is one where we're evolving, or we're supposed to be evolving, and that our soul is part of an oversoul, and that we're directly connected to source, and Earth is a very special place. So I think a lot of souls came here to help with the raising of the consciousness here. So, we would have a better outcome than what was planned for us. And I definitely feel like I'm connected to a mission, if you will, to do what I came here to do. And, it's kind of a unique focus. I'm not really into movies or anything like that, but it's like what I'm doing, it's like I know. And I can't go too far beyond that. I can park the car and I can point you in the direction. I can say, look at this. Do I understand it all? No, but I know that it's important.
Well, just to let you know, you are on the path, because just this conversation alone has me lit and has me just, when I'm having a rough day or when I'm too caught up in the matrix, your work, other people in that same realm, that's the stuff that kind of brings me back. And hearing you say kind of, you just know about certain things, and that's kind of how I feel about certain things. I've never had a read in or stuff, but I've had stuff resonate in me. and then hear about it later and know, all right, that is that. And I'm kind of on the same wavelength as you, is we're here to elevate and awaken people. I'm kind of the belief that Rich and I are second wave volunteers, and we are just here to vibrate and amplify and raise the people around us, and not necessarily have anything particular, but just to be here and elevate the people around us. So I really connect to what you said, and I thank you for your time tonight and the information you've been putting out, because like I said, it connects me and grounds me to purpose and why we are here, and not to get too lost in the weeds.
Yep. And I identify as a second wave too. And that refers to Doris, probably Doris Cannon, right?
Yep.
Dolores Cannon. And she was a hypnotherapist who started doing past life regressions with people and was coming into people with non-human lives and people in lives in other places. And she has written several books. But a second wave volunteer is basically somebody that just kind of comes in and just is. A first wave are the older generation that came in when it was a lot harder, and the third wave are like the crystal kids and the indigos and the kids that are already wired for this, and we kind of came in and we're kind of in the in between, and we don't have that DNA, but we kind of collect what we need as we go through life. But there's something about us, and it doesn't require anything additional. It's just the process of living and being and doing. And that's why I say my spiritual practice sucks, but somehow I always manage to be in the right place at the right time doing the right thing, and that's my gift.
Yeah. And I think that takes a lot of practice to recognize that too, right?
Most of my life.
Yeah.
I didn't see it most of my life, and finally I'll be 60 this summer, and I'm in my mid 40s, and I'm thinking I must be more advanced than I realized, because things just kind of happen the right way. Like I'm not doing anything. And that was kind of when I started to realize that there was something more going on.
So, Michelle, as always, we got 4 rapid fire questions for you to finish off this epic conversation we've had tonight. Are you a coffee drinker?
Yep.
How do you brew your coffee? How do you take it?
Keurig Black.
All right.
Great value right now.
Any particular roast? You like dark roast, medium roast, light roast?
Medium or dark.
Yeah.
Probably medium. I do like dark, but sometimes it's too much.
Michelle, I would have changed this one up just ever so slightly. And usually we ask about daily practices and rituals, but I'm more curious because we've asked you this before, but I'm curious of your kind of daily practice setup for your research.
I usually morning time is the best creative time for me. I can do other things later in the day, but I can't do the kind of research that I need to do to be able to put out what I put out. But I can do it every morning. So usually I get up and do a few other things on the computer, and then I start into the research. And like tomorrow, I'll probably give myself a break from research since I just put a big one out today. And that's been about 10 to 12 days of putting that together. I said I had already done a 3-part series, but I ended up adding quite a bit of new information and taking out quite a bit of old information from the original videos because it was tangential to what I was saying. And it's the longest video I've ever put out, an hour and 44 minutes or so. But I felt like I needed to put all 3 parts in one video because it will have a much greater impact that way, because all of the parts are interconnected. So
Okay.
personally, I prefer shorter videos, but if it's important to the information, then I'm cool with a longer video.
And I guess piggybacking off of that, do you notice a different in your bump with a short video versus a longer video in terms of views or comments?
Not necessarily.
No. Okay.
Um, not necessarily.
Okay.
Some people tell me they like the longer videos.
Yeah.
Personally, I like to put a lot of power in the punch and, make it as impactful as I can in a short period of time. Because that's kind of about my attention span. I want to know what it is you're saying. And that's why I'm really careful with that. Because if there's too many words going on, then I get lost and I'm done. So I want to get the point made as quickly as I can and as clearly as I can. But it just kind of depends on what it is. When I'm just doing viewers' comments and going from place to place to place, that's one thing. But when I'm doing deeper research, sometimes it does take longer, but it needs to go out there. I mean, the way I look at it, if it's in there, there's a reason for it.
Yeah. Cool.
What are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
Animal rescue videos and Food Network cooking competitions.
All right.
That's how I unwind at night.
Okay.
I particularly like pit bulls and parolees.
Okay.
But any good animal rescue video, Hope for Paws and Paw Squadron and the Dodo. It's about what I can handle.
All right.
Nothing wrong with puppies and rescues.
There you
No.
go.
It's good for the soul. I have a feed like that too, so I appreciate that. Michelle, do you have a guilty pleasure?
Food, I guess. I like to get pizza, and like I said, my diet's not very good either. I like all the wrong things, but I would rather get something that somebody else has made than fix my own food at this point. I don't mind fixing it for other people, but kind of for myself, I like that.
Do you have a go-to pizza topping?
There's a R&R Pizza down the road makes a really good Greek pizza with Kalamata olives and green olives and feta cheese, and it's just pretty darn good.
Sounds pretty good.
Michelle, you're the best.
Yeah,
you
thank you.
made my day. I needed this conversation. I didn't know I needed it, but I needed this. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
It's-
Curious to see what you see if you find anything about that stump house tunnel.
Okay, I'll check it out and I'll look for those canals
I will.
around where you live.
I will definitely.
Guarantee they're there. And the thing about the southern Jersey and that whole area, there used to be a trolley car running that route from Atlantic City. Again, this is like right on the coast where like who's building a trolley car here? But you probably would find evidence of that where you live in South Carolina.
Yeah, I'll take a look. We have a big there's a freight train that runs through here multiple times a day, so I'm sure there's plenty of little offshoots and different things. I will definitely do some investigating here as it starts to get a little bit warmer in the springtime.
Yep. Feel free to send me photos or leads or anything like that too.
I will for
No,
sure. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. And appreciate you both.
Have a good evening.
Thanks. You all too.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.